You are listening to Aim Higher, a Catholic podcast designed to instruct and to encourage the daily practice of our faith. Pax et bonum, peace and good to you all. This is Aim Higher. I'm Father Anthony here with Sister Catherine, and today's topic is going to be a recurring one that we have is of movies. And we're going over what our favorite Catholic movies are. And today we're going to talk about my favorite Catholic movie, which is A Man for All Seasons. Well, I can't really say my favorite, but it's certainly one of my favorites. It's certainly one, it's actually a lot of I have a lot of sentimentality towards, I suppose, because it's one that I watched all the time with my father and my brothers and learned lines. We would do lines back and forth from the movie because it's such an excellent movie. It's written. Now, what is Man for All Seasons? It's a movie that recounts the last few years of the life of St. Thomas More. St. Thomas More was the Lord Chancellor of England back in the 16th century during the reign of Henry VIII. And if you know anything about Catholic history, you know Henry VIII was the English monarch that broke away from the church, making himself the head of the church in England, which of course he cannot rightfully do. And he did all this because of a woman, because of Anne Boleyn. He wanted to wed this woman because his wife, Catherine of Aragon, was unable to bear him a son, at least a healthy son, or many have died in the process of giving birth. His only living child through Catherine was Princess Mary, which would become Mary of Scots. And just a little background, just a short background of the tumultuous time that St. Thomas More lived in his position as Lord Chancellor. I thought, sister, to get the book, The Poverello's Round Table, and just read the little description of St. Thomas More, because it gives a pretty good idea of him, who he was. But let's get some comments from you, because I have hogged the first few moments of this podcast.
That's quite all right. I'm actually glad you grabbed the Poverello's Round Table, because that is because his feast day is in July. I won't, I can't. I mean, I suppose I could put it in the Seraph. I usually just, stick with the months, but maybe, I'll just do something crazy one year. Maybe this June, I'll just do it. But I did chuckle when you mentioned Henry VIII and his choices because of a woman. And I know it just sounded funny to me, just in the sense like, yeah, it was because of her, but
she wasn't okay.
She wasn't forcing him.
Not really. But well, when you if you delve really into the histories of the Protestant Reformation in England, it's pretty extensive. I remember reading Hilary Belloc's work, The Characters of the Reformation, and many people were just the tools of this movement. Henry VIII, in many ways, was just a tool.
I'm sorry, he's a tool.
He's a tool. But no, it's that, Henry VIII, sure, he broke away from Rome, but in his mind, he was still Catholic. He didn't plan to break away from tradition, from holy orders, from the things that he knew to be Catholic. I mean, he was a very devout Catholic at a point in his life. He even wrote a book condemning the errors of Martin Luther and his contemporaries, called In Defense of the Seven Sacraments, defending the authority of the Pope and his universal jurisdiction.
But there had to be something on that level, because, as you said, he broke away from Rome and thought he was still Catholic, but he knew he actually couldn't be. Like, obviously, you can't. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, intellectually, he was no dummy. As you point out, he wrote a book in defense of the second sacraments. Like he I don't know, I guess he maybe was trying to convince himself and other people he was still Catholic,
That's
but we know that he's not.
mm.
That doesn't work like
Well
that.
well, when you saw what it evolved to becoming the Anglican Church, um, eventually became, a totally different religion, that even the connection they had with Rome was severed because they changed the rites of ordination. They ended up going over during the reign of, Queen Elizabeth, who was the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, um, that they moved to their Book of Common Prayer, and the ordination was taken from that. Of course, it does not talk about sacrifice, the duty of the priest to perform sacrifice or the forgiveness of sins. They've taken so much out. It was no longer a valid ordination. It wasn't really an ordination. So, but it did take up until Leo the 13th to officially proclaim that, though.
So let me ask you this. So,
Hmm.
because obviously, and you do get this from the story in the movie, but there were Catholic bishops who didn't want to cross Henry VIII and sided with him, right? And
Mm-hmm.
were probably part of his that eventually became his Anglican church. But so
Mm-hmm.
would if they already went with him, would anything that they would do be after that be invalid? Like anyone they would have ordained, would that have been invalid?
Well, there's the difference between validity and licitness. Validity, especially when it comes to the administration of the sacrament of holy orders, it all depends on the power of the order itself. If the bishop, a validly ordained bishop, has the intention to ordain a priest, follows the correct matter and form, even if he is in schism, even if he's in heresy, he still has the power, the indelible mark upon his soul. He could still do that. Now, it's not lawful because he has broken away from Rome.
But wouldn't the intention be kind of off? Because if he wasn't, he separated and he's under Henry VIII, obviously anyone he's going to bring to holy orders, he wants to follow under that, not to be truly with um, the church.
Well, that is
Because
a question, and it's a question you have to take with each specific case, and unless you're told what their intention was, but at least for the first, I see for the first few decades of this, uh, it was not a very clear cut situation. So that you would think that they would have had in their own minds still maintaining the church, still maintaining the valid order and the succession. So their intention may still have been correct. It's kind of hard to really judge what their
yeah,
intention was. Now,
sure.
as you follow along over the years, um, you have to basically follow the general principle that if they have the intention to do what the church does, and they have the intention of ordaining actual priests or consecrating actual bishops, and they do everything correctly, you have to assume that's their intention. If there was nothing prior that would suggest that their intention is corrupt, let's say that if a Freemason could have valid orders, he could. And say one was valid. Say it was a Catholic bishop who then later on became a Freemason for some reason, which I might add, the Freemasons have been condemned by the Catholic Church, and it's very clearly stated anyone who joins such a society is ipso facto excommunicated. And by ipso facto, that means by the fact of their heresy, of their falling into this secret society, taking part into it, they don't need to go through the court of law in the church. It doesn't need to be pronounced officially. They are kicked out of the church. Now, what is the end of the ultimate goal of the Masonic uh, order, if you want to call it? It would be to destroy the Catholic Church. So one would have to then question, if you had a bishop who was a Freemason, he has conflicting loyalties. First off, if you're truly loyal with Christ, you would have nothing to do with such a society.
Right.
So you would have to assume the fact that he has made these vows before this Masonic lodge and the supreme the I forget the name, the supreme grand master, um, that his intention would not be valid because he's seeking to destroy souls, destroy the church, not to propagate the faith and to administer sacraments and to baptize people into the Church of Christ. That would be helping the church, not destroying it. Now, that's kind of pretty straightforward. And I know Bishop Giles wrote an article a few years ago about that, uh, proposed the whole thing, whether it was even whether it was possible, and hypothetically, sure, because if he has valid orders, he could do it, but his intention is certainly lacking. And we would have to conclude by that fact that his intention is to follow the will of the Freemasons. And people can argue that.
Yeah.
It's a subject of debate, but
Yes.
this is the simple logical conclusion. And since holy orders, there shouldn't be any doubt, any reasonable doubt, if a good case is actually presented uh, that questions the validity of an order, then you have to conditionally re-administer holy orders. And because you have the lifeblood of the church is found in baptism for the individual soul is where they find salvation. It's the gateway sacrament where they enter into the church and they can receive the other sacraments. The sacrament of holy orders is for the lifeblood of the entire faithful, all the church militant, and for giving them the sacraments and preaching and guiding, instructing towards the way of salvation. So you can't have a doubt with those two, especially.
Yeah.
And when that occurs, um, like in that case, now of course I break up the Freemasons. They weren't even uh formed, at least the way that we know it, not that I'm aware of, by this time, but there probably was some kind of influence, something similar to it. You had certain orders that have arisen during that time. So I might be speaking out of turn here, actually. I think they might have been around, but excuse me. But when you come to the Anglican orders, was their intention insufficient? Uh, as time grew on. And I don't think it was, I don't think it took all the way up to Leo the 13th by the end of the 19th century to, uh, for that to really take in effect that the orders were invalid. I think pretty much as soon as they implemented the new rites of ordination from the Book of Common Prayer. And then when all of the subsequent bishops died out, because even if you are a valid bishop, you perform a rite for a sacrament that is contrary to that which is given to us by the church. When we say it's by the church, it's through the apostles, and it comes to us from Christ, then you can have the power to do it, but it's not going to be in effect. Even if you had the intention for a person to be ordained, if you did not follow the proper matter and form, it doesn't matter what your intention was. So these true bishops and these true priests would eventually have died off. How long? Let's just say 100 years. So probably at least or like yeah, probably at least maybe even sooner. But I think it's a safe bet to say 100 years, a generation, maybe. that they were probably no longer valid priests and bishops.
Yeah, I guess in my mind, like it didn't all happen instantaneously.
No, didn't.
And I'm guessing that the bishops that did, because they had to sign a declaration of Henry VIII being the head of the Church of England. That
Well,
was
they had to do it. They had
okay.
to denounce their allegiance to Rome.
But that was probably not, I mean, I, it wouldn't it would have been the bishops, not their priests per se. And it probably wasn't every bishop in England either.
Well, there's only one bishop that is known to have actually gone against that, and that was
Mhm,
St. John Fisher,
mhm,
who was an associate of St. Thomas More.
right.
And he's the only one. And actually, if you, the movie of A Man for All Seasons is based off a play written by Robert Bolt. And you could actually now I could actually we could actually do two different episodes on the 1966 version, um, starring Paul Scofield, not Robert. I think it was Robert Zimmerman was the director, but starring Paul Scofield as St. Thomas More. Or we could go to the one I think it was like 1985, starring Charlton Heston and directed by Charlton Heston, who plays St. Thomas More, and that one is more, in keeping with the structure of the stage production, and
Okay.
I've only seen the stage production, um, on YouTube, and I wasn't impressed, with it. Being a theater, person, I was critiquing their,
Mhm,
interpretations
mhm.
and even some of their acting ability,
I'm
but
sure.
it's a fantastic script. But in the play itself, they reference Saint John Fisher. In fact, while Saint Thomas was imprisoned, and yes, he was imprisoned, he in the play, he requested his wife when they were finally able to visit him to take some of the food she brought him to Saint John, and it just reminds us there was one bishop that stood up, but did all of the um, clergy follow along? No, not all of them
Right.
did.
Well, and I guess, and I mean, who knows? I mean, like I said, it just didn't all happen instantaneously, and maybe some of these priests, went into hiding,
Well,
and said
you
or
know,
said mass for people that were did see the error. Because I mean, people knew what was going on, and people that understand the faith had to realize that this is not proper.
well,
So,
this the no, it was it was something beyond Henry VIII himself. And there were other, components into it. You had, Cromwell, Thomas Cromwell, who was, really, and he's in the movie, he's in the play. He was an actual man, and he was kind of the bulldog for the king, sniffing out all the men who were, opposed to this marriage to Anne Boleyn, which was all started. Like, he wanted a divorce. He wanted a divorce. The Pope would not grant him a divorce. Now, I had to understand the term divorce was used in a very broad way, meaning actually an annulment. Uh, and you were basing on the fact that Henry VIII, his marriage to Queen Catherine, or at least it was his argument, is the fact that she was his brother's widow. According to canon law, uh, you are not permitted to marry the widow or the widower of of a sibling, unless you're given a dispensation from the Holy See. And why is there this rule here? I really don't want to get into that. It has a lot to do with blood and heredity, and some cases, kind of a spiritual connection. But just leave it there. That's what the church taught, and that's what the church teaches. So they did receive this dispensation on the grounds that it would have been good for the state. It would have been good for the monarchy, because remember, in Europe at the time, all the monarchies really were closely related by blood or marriage. And that is one of the ways in which they solidified the uh, treaties with each other, and the truces they would have with one another through marriage. So, and especially since uh, sh- her cousin was the Holy Roman Emperor at the time, you certainly wanted to be um, in good with that. So there was a lot of reasons for it and why the church approved it to keep peace. And it was a blessed marriage for so long.
Right.
And
As you talked about, Henry wanted to marry her.
yes, he's
He
the
liked her.
yes.
This wasn't just strictly like, oh, this is an arranged marriage. This is all about politics. He actually was. He was attracted to her. He liked her. He wanted to marry her.
Mhm.
And it was, boiled down to because she could not give him a son, she's no good anymore.
Well, and the thing is that she he was considerably younger than her. I mean, when he was proposed, he was only an 18-year-old, and I believe she was already in her early to mid 20s.
So old.
So that really would have kind of you could understand that they'd be kind of turned off by the initial by the initial proposal, but she acquiesced and found that, he did have this strong bearing, which his brother Arthur also carried, and they made not only the best of their marriage, but they brought out the best in their marriage. She was a wonderful influence on him, being a tertiary just like St. Thomas More, and, you know, it was probably greatly through her influence that he was inspired to write this defense of the Catholic Church. And, he went to mass almost every day, and all these things that were good were greatly due to her influence. And oh, when you take that away, when a obstacle is put before you spiritually, as Henry VIII, um, all that good, all the positives start to dwindle away, and you just start focusing on negative things. And with Henry VIII, it didn't take long when he wanted to send her away. And even in a lot of things that I've read, it's not that he really hated Catherine. He didn't hate her. It's just having her around was unbearable for him because it was reminding him of what he has done. So he did send her to I forgot which castle because she was still the Duchess of I forget what she was the Duchess of. It has been so long since I read on this, but she was put into exile. She died in exile, and her one constant companion was a Franciscan priest, Blessed John Forrest, who was also one of the later martyrs of the English Revolution, really. St. Thomas More being really, I think he was the first prominent uh, person in England to, well, actually, no, no, wait a minute. I better correct myself because I do not remember whether or not Blessed John Fisher, Saint John Fisher, I keep can't demote him here. Saint John Fisher or Saint Thomas More. I'm not sure which one was martyred first, executed first. Uh, but I can't remember. But
Yeah, I can't remember
anyway,
either.
um, not really talking much about the movie here,
No.
but it's. I will say this though, it was really this movie, among other things, that really stirred me to wanting to look more into the history of not just England itself, but all of Catholic Europe. And when you're reading West uh, Western civilization, history on Western civilization, history of Europe, it's Catholic history. It is Catholic history. So, yeah, it did kind of begin that love I have for the topic, but you look at the movie itself, it's so well structured. I mean, it had just a fantastic cast. You had, like I said, Paul Scofield, which I believe it was one of his first films. And he did a few other before, but his first prominent role. You had Orson Welles as Cardinal Wolsey, who was the previous Chancellor of England, a cardinal, with clearly knowing the importance of allegiance with Rome, um, broke away because of pressure from the king. He was unable to secure a divorce, an annulment, and because of that, eventually down the line, Henry VIII uh, threw him into the tower, and that's where he died. He was probably going to be executed, but he died. Thomas More was the one that um, followed him as became chancellor after him. Now, this is an interesting thing because when you look at the movie and how it is laid out, you almost get the feeling that things are happening within a matter of days of each other, where a lot of these events actually um, take place months, if not years, between each other. And just one thing, I guess, if I had to give one critique to the movie, it would have been you would like to have known exactly when these things occurred. But the movie is so good that you don't really think about it too much.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, that critique just came to me right now. So after over 20 some years of really enjoying this film, if that's the only thing I could come up with, then all right.
Right.
Um, so that's a
And
little bit.
it's funny because you have such a memory of this movie as a young person. I had no interest in watching it. I was probably in my 30s, late 20s, early 30s when I first saw it. So I just didn't, appreciate it.
I knew of the film, but the first time I recall watching it was I was a Saturday, and I just got home. Yes, I had um Saturday detention, school. Uh it's just in the morning. We had to get there at 7 to 12 and doing schoolwork and doing chores around the school. This was one of our punishments. I guess we were so bad it needed
For
to go into
what?
Saturday. I don't remember what it was. I'm sure it had something to do with not doing my schoolwork.
I mean, I would figure it has to be pretty big because what teacher wants to monitor Saturday detention? I mean, it
Well,
sounds like a punishment for
I
the
I guess
teacher.
she didn't have much to do that day. But then we got things cleaned and did things for her that she, might not have had time to do. So she utilized us pretty well. And then it was actually fun to what I remember. But it's not like and my brother Steve was with me. And
Yeah.
it's not like we are our brother Steve.
It's just your brother. He's not mine.
Our brother Steve.
See how it is.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm no longer part of the family.
You never were. Anyway, so we were both there, and and the thing that stood out was the fact that I think we got dropped off because it was a little bit of a distance to the school, but we had to take the bus home. So it was one of our many uh, trips on the city bus
Mhm.
from church to home, but because church and school are at the same building. Anyway, I remember getting home and being like 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and I think it was our brother James was there watching it, and I remember coming into the scene, just standing there. You walk into a room and someone's watching a movie and it gets your attention, you just stand there and you watch it for a bit because you have every intention to walk out as soon as your interest dies, but then you end up standing there for like 20 or 30 minutes before you decide, "Hey, I'm gonna sit down. I may watch this film." and I kinda liked it. I don't know why, because I wasn't really into theater as much as I was in, later years, but it was so well done. Ah,
I just honestly, I just don't think I was really mature enough to appreciate it until I was nearly 30. I mean, because it's definitely not a movie that you would sit with. I mean, maybe I wouldn't say any kid, but it's not, because it's not as delightful as Reluctant Saint or the
no.
Song of Bernadette. It's kind of dark. It's
Yeah, it's got a very serious tone. There's some
right.
humor in it.
Sure.
There is a line, uh the film begins with St. Thomas More. Well, actually, it begins with men in the boat leaving Cardinal Wolsey at Hampton Court and then going to St. Thomas More's residence in Chelsea in order to bring him a letter summoning him to come before Cardinal Wolsey ASAP. And when they find St. Thomas, he's entertaining friends. And those who were present were his friend, the Duke of Norfolk, also his wife, Lady Anne, his daughter, Lady Margaret. No, no, that's not his wife's name.
Oh, I know what Alice.
Lady
Sorry.
Alice. I think that's Anne Boleyn. No, he wasn't married
Well,
to
and
Anne
then I was like,
Boleyn.
Sally? I don't know why
No,
I
so
said, because
no, no.
Alice, Sally,
Alice,
Anne, that's
Lady
just crazy.
Alice, and Richard Rich, who would eventually be the one who portrayed
Mhm.
St. Thomas. Anyway, as he's summoned and he goes, and there's a lot of humorous marks on no one really likes the cardinal and such. And well, he goes before the cardinal, and Wolsey brings up the fact that before, while they were in um, counsel, because St. Thomas More, at this point in his life, he's already was a successful lawyer. He was renowned for works like the work that he wrote, the book Utopia. He was known really for his honesty. He was known for his sincerity. He was, and especially his devotion to Holy Mother of the Church. He is a good Catholic. Uh, that was his reputation, and he became a judge, just like his father, John Moore, a knight and a barrister. Now, so he's there in the council, and now he's being questioned by Wolsey. And the line begins as Wolsey's writing. It's like, "So you opposed me in council this morning, Thomas?" Says, "Yes, your grace. You are the only one?" "Yes, your grace." "You're a fool." "Well, thank God there's only one fool on the council." "Why did you oppose me?" "I thought your grace was wrong." "It's a matter of conscience." "You're constant regret to me, Thomas. If you only could see facts flat on without that horrible moral squint, a little more common sense, you would have made a statesman. And then as he says that line, you hear the trumpet sound, and it's Henry VIII coming on his horse. And it's like, ah, the king. It's like, ah, where has he been? Do you know? Thomas responds, "Ah, your grace. Oh, spare me your discretion. He's been playing in the muck again. He's been to Mistress Anne Boleyn. More, are you going to help me? If your grace will be specific. Oh, a plotter. All right, we'll plot. The king wants a son. What are you going to do about it? Well, I'm very sure the king needs some advice from me and what to do about it, which is a line I laugh at.
Mhm.
Um,
Well.
because it's so frank and such a just a blunt statement. Now,
Mhm.
in this conversation, Wolsey is looking for Thomas's help in order to secure this annulment from the Pope. Now, St. Thomas proposes the argument. He says, you know, the he said the Pope gave a dispensation so the king might marry his brother's widow for state reasons. So are now to ask him to dispense of his dispensation also for state reasons. Now, Wolsey wasn't going to have any of that, and he expressed, and Thomas figured it out, that they were going to use political pressure to get their way. such as possibly confiscating church property, and things of that nature, which of course is what they did eventually, was the aftermath of the defection from Rome, was taking over all the monasteries and depleting the wealth of the church. And say, well, what was that such a bad thing? Well, one of the results that you had from this was the fact that the charities that you had the monks and the sisters doing, all these religious orders, were no longer existent because they were kicked out of their monasteries. So this was a blight to the welfare of the country. This is documented. This is documented. And you then so the church, Rome, would have to acquiesce because they don't want to see this happen. Well, Rome did it because they examined the case. You see, it's not like they said, "Hey, we want an annulment," and the Pope said no. They examined the case. I think it took at least a year by the time they went through everything and said, "No, you do not have grounds for annulment. The marriage was valid from the beginning." Because what is an annulment? And Bishop Giles, I hosted Father Joseph's radio program yesterday, had Bishop Giles on, and we talked about that. A lot of people have the false idea that an annulment is just a Catholic divorce. No. What an annulment states is that due to some, um, there was a specific word I was looking for, due to some issue, we'll just put it that way, um, deficiency, the marriage was not valid. It could be that you found out that the person that you were marrying um, was not, forthright, in their identity. Maybe the person was under an influence such as alcohol while they were being married.
It's
Uh,
hard to prove, but
Sometimes you can prove it. Sometimes it can be proved, but that's just two examples. It doesn't really even fit here. But the grounds here were that, well, that was my sister's wife, and it goes against canon law,
it should never
so
have
so it should
been.
never have happened.
Yeah.
And they're like, and he was invoking scripture. It was Leviticus, and it says, "Thou shalt not look upon the nakedness of thy brother's widow." And that was the scripture quote that Henry VIII was using in his defense. He and his, if you want to use the term, lackeys. And the Pope said no, because the Pope, having that authority to do it, and he did it, it was valid. There was no other ground to stand on, but Henry VIII wasn't going to have it. Now, Thomas More was no idiot. Thomas More understood the social climate of England at the time probably better than any other man. And he even wrote in defense of the church several times, not necessarily against Luther because Luther was on the continent, but against the likes of like Wycliffe, who was promoting the idea of private interpretation of scripture, and that the Catholic Church is the church of the Antichrist. It's not the true church of Christ, and these things, and he refuted that. So he understood that if Henry VIII goes in this direction, or possibly could, that's going to create a problem, not just with his relationship, because he did have a personal relationship with Henry VIII. He was a close friend of Henry
Mhm.
VIII. He was introduced to the court by Henry VIII, and he was a close friend with Catherine of Aragon. Oftentimes, they would have meals together and talk theology and such. So he was really, uh, Henry VIII's first choice to be chancellor. And I remember seeing a documentary because it was about the movie, but not also about the life of St. Thomas, especially. And it was posed the question, why would Henry VIII, knowing the orthodoxy and the loyalty that Thomas More had, the papacy, Why would he want him to be his chancellor? And then the following question is, St. Thomas was aware of what was transpiring and what could happen. Why did he accept the office? Well, we can only conclude that both of them probably hoped that they could bring the other one around to one to his way of thinking, then another to the church's way of thinking.
Yeah.
And he performed his office, and it was for a few years he was Lord Chancellor. And in the movie, it has a scene where Henry VIII comes to St. Thomas's home in Chelsea to discuss the um, the divorce, as they termed it, and it is, and I have to say, they had uh, oh, I have all these different actors popping in my head of of the of a who was in it. I can't remember who played Henry VIII. I gotta look it up. Robert Shaw. I had to look it up because I had Robert Redford. I had all these names popping in my head. So these are not the names. Robert Shaw. I mean, he played it fantastic. He's not in the movie a lot, but this one scene,
Quite memorable.
it's memorable, and it comes where you can see that there's a that he's torn. That Henry VIII is torn here, and he wants his chancellor to be on his side. I mean, there's even a question there. It's like, Thomas, why can't you see everyone else does? He says, well, then why does your grace need my poor support? Because you're honest. It was more to the
It's
purpose you're known to be honest.
and that's very interesting. It kind of struck me earlier when you were talking about the oh, what's his name? Um,
Cromwell?
yes, because he was seeking out anyone that opposes. Like it just goes to show like how, if you're so right, why do you
Mhm.
need people to agree with you? If you're fully convinced that what you're doing is the right thing, why do you need numbers? Why do you need that?
Well,
Because you're right. You're hoping the majority will ease your conscience, but
mhm.
God is um,
Well, it's an interesting thing you bring up conscience, and the fact that Thomas More was not just the friend, he was Lord Chancellor. He was a very influential man in England, and
mhm,
if he would stand by the king, uh, those who may have opposed may be more inclined to follow along without question.
mhm,
And even for Henry VIII's conscience, I mean, the thing is, when it was brought up, in fact, of questioning Sir Thomas on his reasons, he never stated that he never denied the supremacy of Henry VIII. He never denied the validity of his marriage to Anne Boleyn. He just never said it, and that's the thing. So Thomas More was playing in ways a political game here. Because, after the event I'm talking about in this scene, it was very clear to Henry VIII, okay, I'm not going to be able to bring him to my way of thinking. He offered him, even greater power than he already had. Thomas More did not accept it. Henry VIII agreed, all right, I'll leave you out of the situation. But what then occurs is that Henry VIII can no longer have Thomas More um, not in his corner, and this was a problem. And uh, as long as Thomas kept silent, and in his mind, I'm keeping silent, and there was a big worry about this, whether or not Thomas More was going to give his opinion. And there's even a scene in the film where he's with his wife Alice, and as he just resigns as being Lord Chancellor, because as soon as Henry VIII officially declared his separation from Rome, that's when Thomas said, I'm done. I
Yeah,
can't be
he
a part of
can't.
this
Mhm.
anymore. So he just quietly never stated his reasons. He quietly did it. And uh, in the movie, there's a scene with his wife where she's like, "Well, that's the end of you. What are you going to do now? Sit by the fire. Draw goslings in the ash." And she's, "Oh, not at all, Alice. Perhaps I'll read. I'll read. I'll write, and I'll think. Perhaps I'll learn to fish. I'll play with my grandchildren when son Rupert on his duty." That's his son-in-law who married his daughter Margaret. Says, "Alice, should I teach you to read?" "Oh, no, by God. Silly man, do you think that they're just going to leave you here? If we govern our tongues, they will." All right, I have a word to say on that. I've not made a statement. I've resigned. That's all. No, now I'm forgetting it. I've resigned. That's all. Says is he said it, this
I can't, even though I
uh,
recently watched it, I
the
can't
head of the
help you.
I've resigned. That's all. This act of parliament is church. Uh, by act of parliament, the king has been made head of the church in England. This English church will then divorce him from Lady Catherine and marry him to Lady Anne. Now, in any of these matters, have you heard me made a statement? No. If I'm to lose my rank and fall to housekeeping, I want a reason. So make a statement now. Alice, no. My protection is silence into the law, and it must be absolute, and it must extend to you. In short, you don't trust me. So he takes her hand. He says, "All right." Says, "I'm the Lord Chief Justice. I'm the keeper of the tower. I am Cromwell. I take your hand, I place it on the Bible, on the blessed cross, and I say to you, woman, as your husband spoke to you of any of these matters, on peril of your soul, what is your answer?" And it's no. So he's doing that to protect his wife, not to incriminate her or for her to incriminate him.
Right.
Because
'Cause perjury is a big deal. I don't know if we
yes.
actually really think about that. And somebody's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
it's, you know, it, if it bring you peace, make things easier, why not do it? It's like perjury is, isn't that one of the, is that one of the sins against the Holy Ghost? Like the or the big offenses or
Well, it's certainly one
well,
of the
I mean, you don't
big
want,
the big offenses
yeah,
against the eighth commandment.
sure, sure.
Um,
Um,
you know,
And of course, as I often say to my catechism students, it's like venial sin is still a disobedience to God's law, and that's still hurtful. That still is saying you don't love God. So I don't, definitely don't want to minimize things in that way. But
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well,
but
that's
to,
true.
but as a good husband, he's protecting her from even like the temptation to perjure herself because
Mm-hmm.
um
Or being tricked
plus
because
also
she
you
can
don't.
answer honestly.
Right, exactly. But also, don't because sometimes people have that mindset. And I know we talked about it before. It's like, well, I'll perjure myself, but then I can go to confession. I was like, that's presumption. Now that's a sin against specifically against the
Mm-hmm.
Holy Ghost. I mean, that you definitely don't play around
See,
with that
but
mentality.
one thing I'd have to say though, now going back, see, now I'm actually reviewing two films here. The 80s version with Charlton Heston, since it went more to the play, it actually had a conversation where Thomas More was discussing this matter with his son-in-law, William Roper. Uh, and Will, of course, is, taking the side that, no, this is absolutely wrong, broke away from the church. And how can you accept this act of parliament? And he says, he said, I can accept the act of parliament because what it says is the king, and it was written that the king is supreme head of the church in England, and as far as God allows. And using that
Mm.
little phrase in there, it gave him enough of a cushion where he could maintain his orthodox view, but still be able to function even as Lord Chancellor and work within the frames of trying to help rectify the situation without having to come up so vehemently against it. Uh, he was a lawyer, so he
Right.
could be very erudite in these matters.
Well, it just popped in my mind though. He is a good example in the sense that, this was going to definitely be a very difficult situation. He knew what was at
Mhm,
stake, what he could potentially lose as far as material goods, and yet he didn't run away. He could have just have, uprooted his family, left the country,
mhm,
could have gone to Rome.
mhm.
Maybe have had an easier time, probably could have started over pretty easily.
Could
And
have
he
had,
didn't.
yeah,
But
yeah.
and I think part of it is because his being such a good and honest man, he had the king's soul in his mind.
Yes,
He want I mean,
yes.
there's a whole
Yeah. Well, no, there was a point, like, eventually when he is called for questioning, by, Cromwell, and, being questioned by him, doing, doing sorry, I had someone text me. Um,
wasn't me.
no, it wasn't you. That because of the so-called incriminating evidence given to, Cromwell by, Richard Rich, because in the beginning of the film, uh, Thomas More, when he's returning back from, his time seeing the cardinal, he is bombarded by a bunch of people trying to plead their case to this judge, and they all wanna go to St. Thomas, and, um, this one lady gives him a cup saying, "No, it's a thank you." It was actually a bribe. St. Thomas eventually figured out it was a bribe, and he had to get rid of it. So he gives it to this young man who was waiting for him. Richard wanted a place in court. He wanted to advance a political career, and he wanted Sir Thomas to help him. Sir Thomas was refusing to help him, and it was like, well, be like, why wouldn't he? He saw in Richard that he was too susceptible to bribes. He was too susceptible. He was too power hungry.
Yeah, it would be advanced at any cost, even to probably the wealth of his soul.
And that's exactly what um
You were so still for
yeah.
there for a second, I thought
I'm
you
sorry.
froze.
I'm so no, it's just I've got somebody texting me and I have to respond to the text. Yes, I'm sorry, in the middle of the podcast, but this has to do with the class because um I need to respond to it because they might come on to hear and interrupt the podcast
Oh,
anyway.
I locked us so they can't get in.
Oh, well, then that was been nice to have. I didn't think to ask that question.
It's okay.
Yeah,
The more you
that's
know.
that's okay, but that's okay. This is technically live, but technically not live, and you'll just have to remind me where I left off as when I get
Oh
back to
boy.
this. Yeah, so how was your day,
Um,
sister? Yeah. Uh,
um, see, now I'm trying to think what were we talking about? I might be able to circle us back. May
it
not.
it was about
St. Thomas More.
yeah, it was a movie, right? Yeah, what
Yeah.
was that movie? Uh A Man for Spring?
No, all seasons. Winter, summer,
Oh, okay. Yeah, that movie.
fall. It is a good movie. I did watch it a couple weeks ago because in the planner that we put out this year, there were monthly challenges, which if you got a planner, you're not like required to do these monthly challenges. You're just put in there for an idea. Anyway, the
Mhm.
monthly challenge for January was to watch a religious movie. And it had been a couple of years since I seen Man for All Seasons. So I thought, well, that would be that's what I chose. So
No, I really it's
it's
fantastic
it's a
film.
good film.
Yeah.
Definitely gives you much to think about. Even if you've seen it a few times, still like, wow, just things that you pick up on it that you didn't notice before, which I think is probably standard in any movie you watch. Um, but
I'm done texting.
sure you
Sorry
are.
about that. Yeah,
Sure
yeah.
you are.
Well, I mean, I had to cancel it. It just was too much confliction. in our schedules on both sides. So
Yeah.
it happens. It happens. It happens.
Yep.
You just pick it up later on. But
Absolutely.
now where I was, I kind of went back more to the beginning of the movie because he's there with Richard Rich.
Which is an important character to
He's a very
introduce.
important character. I mean, I already talked about him, and he's very important to this. And in this conversation, uh, the night before, he was chasing after Sir Thomas as he was walking to the boat, saying, "Did you recommend me?" Recommend him to his friend, the Duke of Norfolk. St. Thomas said no. But he finished by saying, "I might have a position for you." Really, what position? Not now, Richard, tomorrow. Well, Richard's not one to say, "Oh, well, I'll just, stroll him by at a convenient time." No, he stayed there on the steps of the dock and waited.
Yeah.
And he had probably been there for like several hours. So Thomas gets off the boat and says, "Have you been here all night?" "Yes." "So Thomas, you mentioned a post." "What?" "Oh yes, Richard, I'll offer you a post with a house and a servant, £50 a year." "Oh, what post?" "At the new school, a teacher." "Oh, Richard, no one's going to offer you a place at court. Master Cromwell said he may do something for me." "Cromwell? Well, if you know Cromwell, then you don't need my help." "Sir Thomas, if you only knew how much I'd rather have your help than his."
Because there's that natural goodness, there's that
Mhm,
virtue of St. Thomas, and
mhm.
yeah.
"Not to a place at court. Why not?" And he shows him the silver cup. He says, "You see this, Rich? What is it? It's a bribe." He says, "I am the gift of Avromation. An Avromation is a lawsuit in the Court of Requests. Italian silver. Take it. No joke." "Oh, thank you." "And what would you do with it?" "Sell it. And buy what? A decent gown." "Oh, Rich, that's just a little bribe. In court, they'll offer you all sorts of things: manors, manor houses, coats of arms. A man should go and not be tempted. Why not be a teacher? You'd be a fine teacher, perhaps a great one. If I was, who would know it? You, your friends, your pupils. God. Not a bad public, that. And the quiet life." "Oh, you say that? After coming from talking with the cardinal?" "Ah, yes, talking with the cardinal. Eats your heart out, isn't it? The high affairs of state." Ah, right there, he lays out who he is. That the only public you really need are those closest to you, and especially God Himself. And it's
Mhm,
interesting. He stated God last. We think, you know, usually when we list people, we go with those of presidents first, but he used God as an effect, using him at the end, the most important. It's like, obviously, God. So who cares? Who knows what you're doing as long as it pleases Almighty God, and it is a vocation which your soul will not be put in jeopardy, then that's all that matters. As long as you save your soul, that's all that matters.
but I do think it's helpful that you do have people, what your friends, your family that do know of what you're doing to more or less motivate you to help you
Yes,
continue. I mean, that's God
yes.
places people in our lives for that purpose.
No,
You're not
it's
supposed
to
to,
encourage one another in
right.
the practice of virtue, and to be and to be a sounding board when we're going through difficulties, to help each
Mhm,
other, to carry one's cross, to help each other carry our crosses where we can.
mhm,
Whether it's just a sympathetic word, or it is uh, just being there for the person, just being in their presence, encouraging them on. And that's all St. Thomas really wanted. Here's one thing that the movies, and you and I have talked about this, sister, the movies didn't really depict, and the stage play didn't depict, is the fact he was so deeply a family man. Now, St.
mhm,
Thomas More, in his history, uh, he went, excuse me, he went to school. While he went to school in London, he stayed at the Cistercian monastery. He lived as though he were a monk, and he was contemplating whether or not he should enter the holy orders. But he decided not to. he felt that his calling was to,
Right. He determined his
yeah,
vocation
it
was not to
vocation,
religious life.
religious life, and kind of interesting because he had all the qualities, but it wasn't his vocation. His vocation was to
Mhm.
be an influence in the world, which it reminds people that uh, we we are meant to influence society, especially if we have to ascend to uh, being a political figure of authority in government. And he thought that he could really help the direction of England for the betterment of this for the greater honor and glory of God. You know, there was a line going back to his conversation with Wolsey when when they're discussing about the divorce, and and he says, "The king wants a son. What are we going to do about it? I'll pray for it daily." Later on in the conversation, as Wolsey is getting frustrated and acting like despair, he says, "But we'll have my prayers to fall back on." And Wolsey, mocking him, it's like, "You govern the country with your prayers."
Which is
And he's
it
like, "Oh,
I was just it's just interesting because I know we talked about this before. He's a cardinal. It just seems like he should be the first to um pray, mention prayer, but
mhm."
obviously he's a corrupt
He's worldly
cardinal.
minded,
Yeah, yeah.
worldly minded. It goes to show that they did Wolsey actually have a vocation? Or what
Right.
or did he just enter it before the, social advantages it would get bring him? Because he was
Possibly.
the
I was gonna
son
say
of a
probably.
butcher. He was the son of a
Right.
butcher,
Yeah.
and he
But
rose up to prominence.
we did talk
I
about
don't
this
know.
at another time. A cardinal doesn't necessarily would not necessarily have holy orders,
No, he
right?
wouldn't
Right.
yeah, he would not necessarily, uh, be, be a priest, be a bishop. A cardinal could be a layman.
Okay.
I mentioned, and we talked about before that uh, Pius the Seventh, who was Pope during Napoleon's reign, his Secretary of State, I think, was only a lector, which is one of the minor orders. So, yeah, Wolsey could have just have been a layman, but be a cardinal. But we know he was an ordained minister. He was a bishop.
Right. Which makes it almost more
Makes it
definitely.
worse. So
Yeah, it does
I
make
don't
it
know
worse.
enough about Wolsey's background
Mhm.
to say whether he had a vocation or not, but you're gonna assume let's just assume he did. And he's fallen away from it through the political pressure. Because even in the movie, it shows a bit of Wolsey's remorse because there's just a really small scene just to show after Thomas meets Woolsey, and you're given the impression this is sometime after because of the changing of the season, which might have been like the reason A Man for All Seasons and the seasons really stand out in the movie. So that it's
Maybe.
an
Mm.
interesting point there. But
An
it's the
interesting
Duke
point
of
of
Nor
interest.
interesting point of interest. The Duke of Norfolk comes to a monastery where Wolsey's dying, and just to take the chain of office away, and said, "Do you have any words for His Majesty?" And Wolsey's response was, "If I only have served God half so well as I've served my king, perhaps God would not have left me to die in this place." Now, oh, I was just going to say before you say anything, sister, that was not just something Robert Bolt made up. Wolsey is quoted to say something very similar to that,
Yeah. Which to me is like, so has he despaired?
or maybe he repented.
Well, I'm just kind of, wondering,
It
but
could
I
have
mean,
gone
that
either
sounds like
way.
that does sound like uh,
It does. Yeah, no, yeah. I say actually when you say you would have left me to die in this place, it does sound like he despaired his
yeah,
own salvation because of his actions. But perhaps,
yeah, who
well,
knows?
perhaps he
S-
did repent.
Someone to pray for.
Someone to pray for. You never know. And so going back to Richard Rich, that's kind of the beginning that what he used. Um, Presenting it to Cromwell. They were trying to find a case against Sir Thomas to bring him to court, to bring him to trial. And, we brought it up before, like, why was this a big deal? Why did the king care? St. Thomas was not just some bum on the street. He wasn't just the everyman. He wasn't just a lawyer. He wasn't just a lord of commons. He wasn't just some duke. He was a very prominent political figure. He was a prominent intellectual figure in Europe. He was part of the Catholic Renaissance. He so
But even after he stepped down, it was still an issue for Henry
Mhm,
VIII
mhm.
because it's someone that I think really did touch his conscience.
And I think a lot of that is it was pecking at his conscience, and they picked that. No, there is a scene between Norfolk and between Cromwell where they're discussing this, and Richard's there, taking note of it, and he's silent, Master Secretary. Why don't we just leave him silent? Your Grace, not being a man of letters, perhaps you're not aware of the reputation of his silence. It bellows up and down Europe. There, they say, he is the king's enemy. Ah, cracked he may be, traitor he is not. And precisely, with a little pressure, we might be brought to say so. It's all we need is a brief declaration of his allegiance to the current administration. Or I say, let sleeping dogs lie. Well, the king does not agree with you. I can't really say much, like, because this is one of those movies, though. There's about 3 times they use language I wish they didn't use. They
Yes,
use
agreed.
GD.
Yes.
It's very quick and
I
abrupt,
Yeah, and
but I
I don't
don't
think I
care for it.
realized until the last
Yeah,
time I
yeah, it really.
watched it. They also used the a term used for female dog. I
Well,
mean, that
yeah, but
yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I'm pointing it out just as that we did talk about, like, don't this is not a movie you sit down with your kids.
yeah,
And this
yeah.
is not one of those things like, well, if I can't watch it with my children, maybe I shouldn't watch it. It's just it's mature, but, I think it'd be over their heads. I mean, it was over
Mm,
my head,
mhm.
really. I really feel like since the last time I watched it, and I'm 40. So, I don't think a kid's gonna
No, I
really
don't think kid
sit
would
through it.
wanna sit through it and watch it.
And there may be
It
some adults that are not gonna be into it. I say
yeah,
at least give it a try.
yeah,
Um,
but it's for me, I also love the acting. That was one of the things that also drew me in, these just
yes.
perfect casting in every part, and,
And
you know,
it
in
still blows
in
my mind how well you know lines from it, and not
yeah,
only lines, but of course you have to bring in an accent for it.
and
Um
in the scene in the scene, he says, you know, no, Norfolk is presenting, he's like, "What charges do you have, to bear?" And, Cromwell's like, says, "I have evidence. When Sir Thomas was a judge, he accepted bribes." And this is where he uses the expletive. He says, he was the only judge since K2 didn't accept bribes, Uh, and then Cromwell makes a very true statement. He says, Your Grace, just because an offense is made into a common practice doesn't make it any less of an offense. This one can send a man to the tower. So he presents the case that they have about the cup they gave to Richard. But even Norfolk, who was supposed to be the kind of the brute, could saw right through it. He said, "I was like, the fact that when this case was brought to court and when the cup was sold, it's very clear that Thomas was getting rid of it." And even Cromwell had to acquiesce, says, yes, it would bear that interpretation. Oh, this is a horse that won't run, Master Secretary. What's a trial, gallop, your grace? We'll find something better. Well, I'll have no part of it. Oh, you have no choice. What is that you say? Oh, the king. The king particularly wishes that you will remain active in this matter concerning Sir Thomas. He's not told me that. Oh, indeed. He told me. Well, look here, Cromwell, what's the purpose to all this? There you have me. It's a matter of conscience, I think. The king wants Sir Thomas to bless his marriage. If he were to attend the wedding, it would save us all a great deal of trouble. He won't attend the wedding. Try to persuade him. I mean, I would try if I were you. Cromwell, are you threatening me? My dear Norfolk, this isn't Spain. This is England. Which is just, and the reason that reference is because this is also during the time of the Spanish Inquisition. So it was a tumultuous time in Spain and getting kind of reputation of other places in the continent of being really harsh. And that's a subject for another time, but Spain really wasn't, uh, the government may have taken certain extremes, but the church itself actually kept a lot of things really well mitigated during the Inquisition, but this isn't but that's what it's in reference to. Um, and in actually actually, in the stage play and in the Charlton Heston version, it they they have a character, uh it was, the ambassador from Spain, I forget his name, who's a character in there, who's just trying to determine, who it whose side St. Thomas is on. Is he for the Pope or is he for the king, and how is he a good churchman? It's a very interesting character, but it was taken out of the movie for obvious reasons. Like, and I kind of forgot one of the things I was talking about St. Thomas More being an actual family man. He had more children than just Margaret. Alice was actually his second wife. So he really cared about keeping his family safe. And but he still had to stand on these principles. So much was taken from him, like Job. He lost his money, he lost his position, he's lost respect from a lot of people for standing on this principle. And we're talking about papal authority, which was something that in that time was not as clearly defined as it was later in subsequent centuries, like in during the Vatican Council, a papal infallibility. It wasn't as clearly stated. It was believed. It's one of the things that it's a tradition from the church. Everyone has accepted and as acknowledged, but never clearly defined. So it was really kind of revolutionary in a way, you want to put it, St. Thomas More standing for this, that he understood really what the papacy is and the position of the Pope. So when things really hit the head, when he was then called before Cromwell, and Cromwell put forth a whole bunch of accusations that really would not stick, very much as you see a lot of places in the court. Um, they will come up with a whole bunch of charges and throw at you, knowing that they're all not going to stick, but just to give you some political, some room to negotiate. So I can shave these off if you just plead guilty or whatever that. But it really wasn't the case with Sir Thomas. They were just trying to find something that they could really latch on because he wasn't saying anything. He wasn't actually telling people what he thought. He kept silent. Qui tacet consentire. Silence gives consent. And that's the axiom of law. So he based it off of that. And I better say that again because I kind of mumbled it. Qui tacit consentire. Silence gives consent. It's Latin. And he's just saying, by according to law, since I'm being silent, you have to assume, according to law, that I'm consenting to what you're saying, not denying it. And that's what he based it on. So basically, they had to keep pushing the envelope more and more. And after his meeting with Cromwell, when it became evident that the king was not leaving St. Thomas be, he was not leaving him alone, leaving him out of the situation. St. Thomas saw that, okay, they're really tightening the noose. And on his way home, and there was a pretty interesting scene where he's trying to get a boat to go back home, but no one would take him on the boat. They all denied him, so he had to walk home. He meets his daughter Margaret on the way, and she explains to him that there's a new act coming out of Parliament, which they're going to minister an oath concerning the marriage. And the lines go is like, and what compulsion is the oath? High treason. No, but what is the wording? But what do the words matter? We know what it will mean, but an oath is made of words. It might be possible to take it. Take it. Yes, and if it can be taken, you must take it too. No. Now listen, Meg. God God made the angels to show him splendor. The animals he made for their innocence and plants for their sheer simplicity, but man he made to serve him cunningly within the wit of his mind. And if we have to encounter a pass where there is no escape, then we can clamor like champions if we have the spittle for it. But it is for God to determine that, not for us. So it is our natural inclination is in escaping. I did not do a direct quote. I had to mumble through some of that, but is in
Still,
escaping. If I can take this oath, I will. He understood politically that he could, because depending on what the oath actually asks him to do, maybe there's something in there. And like I alluded to the one with Charlton Heston, where he said that as you know, he's head of the church in England as far as God allows. He used that as that loophole where he could still stay there, unless they made it even clear what their intentions were. It was made quite clear in with this oath, because then he had to be imprisoned, and he was imprisoned in the tower. And one of the things they showed there, and now this was a good show of the passage of time, was that after he was came to the tower, he looks out a window and you see the changes: winter, fall, spring, and that he was there for quite a while. And you know that in the following scene, he's woken up in the middle of the night. He's taken before a tribunal and he's questioned. And he's questioned before Cromwell, um, Norfolk, and also Cranmer, who is the archbishop, which is very, his history is very interesting because he was kind of a Photius priest, very heretical, but he was a favorite of Anne Boleyn. So Anne Boleyn and her influence basically got him the job to be the new archbishop. Um, if you want to read a book, if you like the history, Hilary Belloc's The Characters of the Reformation, it goes into that. It's quite interesting that Anne Boleyn wasn't just this. She wasn't just the woman. She has some stake in her success. It's quite interesting, and a lot to say. But anyway, they're questioning him, and I always liked the scene, among many others. But is it not, Thomas? Do you have anything you wish to say? No. Cromwell comes in, says, "You seen this document? I've many times. It is the Act of Succession. This is a list of those who've sworn to it. Says, as I said, I've seen it before. Will you swear to it?" No. Thomas, we must know plainly whether you accept the offspring as Queen Anne as heir to the throne. Well, King and Parliament tell me that they are, so yes, of course I do accept them. But will you swear that you do? Yes. Then why would you swear it to the Act? Because there's more than that in the Act. And of course, then Cranmer comes in, just so. And it's just so interesting. But there's a line in there. I don't want to do. I could. I
I was
could.
like,
I
you could
could
just do
do
the whole
the
movie
whole
for
scene, but
everybody.
I just there will be a few parts I got to flub through. So I'd rather
Yeah.
just get to the point. In this scene, uh, at one point, Norfolk expresses that he's ignorant of a lot of these things. He says, "Look, I'm no scholar. I don't know if the marriage was lawful or not. But Thomas, look at these names," showing him the document of those who've signed. "And you just come along like I did for fellowship. And when you're sent to heaven for doing your good conscience, and I'm sent to hell for not doing mine, will you come with me for fellowship?"
Mhm.
Cranmer comes in. "Are you saying all those names on this document are damned, Sir Thomas? So I have no window to see into a man's future. So it is a matter of question." Says, "Yeah. Well, yes." And Cranmer goes, "But the fact that you owe allegiance to your sovereign king is not worthy of question. So weigh it out against a certainty and sign." Thomas More responds, "Some men think the earth is round, others think it is flat. It is a matter worthy of question. But if the earth were flat, would the king's command make it round? And if it were round, would the king's command flatten it? No, I will not sign." So you have more regard, as Cromwell, you have more regard for your own doubt than the king's command. There is one thing which I have no doubt. I have no doubt I will not sign this oath. And you, Master Secretary, will not trick it out of me. I might get it out of you in other ways. Well, you threaten like a dockside bully. Really, how should I threaten? Well, like a minister of state, with justice. So justice is what you're threatened with, and I'm not threatened. So in that scene, he goes home. He goes back to his cell, and he informs, innocently that he has book. He wants. Can I get a few more books? Cromwell's like, "No, you can't have any books. No. Can I see my family?" "No, you're not going to get to see your family." Uh, He's sent away. Cromwell's, Norfolk is like, is that necessary? And Cromwell, he's been at this for a while, trying to find something, and the king is getting on his throat. He's like, it's just like, Norfolk, this case concerning Sir Thomas, the king becomes impatient. I with you, and yes, his impatience might embrace a duke or two. So they all go off, and you see Cromwell is just so frustrated. He's trying to find something in law where he can capture Sir Thomas because he is such a thorn in the king's conscience, as sister has stated. I mean, that was really the thing. He was a embodiment of conscience to the king. So that's why he had to get rid of Catherine of Aragon by putting her in exile. But since Sir Thomas was such an influential person, also in the as I mentioned before, in the intellectual sphere, he had to get rid of him entirely. So uh they had to find him guilty of treason, is what they were looking for. So, I've got a line. I did forget a line in there that I really love. I really love. And that uh where Norfolk in the whole interrogation says, Thomas, we must know plainly whether you recognize the offspring as Lady Anne as heir to the throne. And he says, well, King of Parliament, tell me also. Yes, of course, I do accept him. Oh, no, it's not. Oh, that's just, oh. And what do you swear that you do? Yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, it was a line he had. No, I'm sorry. It was a line he had to Cranmer because he was like, Cranmer goes, well, until we know your political reasons, I can only guess your spiritual standing as well. Thomas replies, well, if you can guess that, my lord, you should have no problem in guessing my objection. Cromwell comes in. So you do have objection to the act, trying to find some kind of
Mm-hmm.
political edge he can to trap him. And Norfolk goes, why do we know that, Cromwell? And Thomas replies, oh, no, my lord, you don't. All you know is that I will not swear to it, so you cannot now legally harm me further. But if you're right in proving that I have an objection, then right again in proving that objection to be treasonable. The law would then let you cut my head off. And that was the thing. They had to find an act of treason. Now, to go against the king openly as supreme head of the church would be considered an act of treason. Now, Cromwell and his lackeys have exhausted everything. Thomas More was their superior. I mean, there were even points in there where you could see that that he was being bested time and time again by Thomas More. And he had to resort to perjury. He offered Richard Rich to be the Secretary of Wales, Attorney General of Wales, sorry, if he would lie under oath. So that's when you get to the court scene. I mean, you have so many other wonderful scenes, like between, one of the things they tried to use to break him was to have his family come and convince him to swear to the act and just get out.
And I did like there was such a in that scene that because we see how basically the sum of everything, how strong in his conviction St. Thomas was, but you did see him break down a little bit, not break down like to give
Mm-hmm.
up, but you could see that this was actually hard for him.
This
I
was
mean,
very hard.
if you know the story, you're following, so like you know logically that this is hard for him, but yet again, this is just actors, this is the movie. I mean, this is based on real life, but I thought it was a really um,
Mm-hmm.
great to see that, because after that meeting, he knew that was going to be the last time he was going to see them. He knew it,
Mm-hmm.
and even though you're standing with your virtue, you're standing for what is right to be on God's side, does not mean it's going to be easy. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that just stood out to me when I watched it recently. It's like you see that human side, because sometimes we think the saints are just um above what we are. There's still like something supernatural about those who've been declared saints. Like there's just something about them that we cannot attain. But
Mhm.
first of all, anyone that gets to heaven is a saint. Just because you're not going to be on the calendar does not mean you're a saint. If you're in heaven,
You're a
but
saint.
right. But sometimes we just get this delusion that they were perfect. Not necessarily they didn't have any difficulties, but they always responded perfectly. They never were impatient. They never broke down, almost gave up. And I don't think I saw necessarily that he was wanted to give up, but you could just see that this hurt him. This hurt him
Um,
so deeply that
mhm,
what should be right order, what should not be in question, what should not be difficult at all, it's falling apart.
mhm.
Not him and his convictions, but everything around him is falling apart.
Well, it reminds you of the fact that one of the injustices, it's not really an injustice, but it's something to overlook when many authors, especially those of centuries past, would write about the life of a saint. They focus so much upon the supernatural side of them that it seemed like they were these supermen and superwomen who didn't do any wrong and that things came easy. But then you forget there was the human side. There was a fear of what might happen. There was a struggle that was going on in the soul. And it's in that struggle is that through that where many of them became saints because they overcame it through God's grace. And it reminds us we're called to do the same thing.
Mhm.
Um
Well, and I hope
mm,
this won't be considered like a
yeah.
spoiler, but the manner of being put to death, St. Thomas knew um, for that particular charge
Hmm.
that he was going to be, I think, drawn and quartered. It was going to be
Yep.
very gruesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and even though he knew that he was going to be, because one of the best lines, and I'm sorry if I'm going to steal it from you for the end, and maybe I shouldn't do it because I'm not going to do it justice. So,
Well, just give it a shot. Give it a shot.
um, so just
Remember,
before he was executed, see, I don't know the lines very well, except for he just said to, I don't know the if it would have been an Anglican priest, I guess. I don't know if that
it
was
was Cramner.
okay. Oh, okay. And I guess the Cranmer questioned, again, St. Thomas's soul, I guess. And he just said, God will not refuse someone so eager to be with him.
Mhm.
And that's just a great line.
It
Um,
is. It's a wonderful line.
and of course now I'm like, I don't know where I was going with this because I was
Focus
stressing
too much
about.
on focus too much
Yeah,
on the
I
line.
was definitely because I mean, and not that I was trying to compete with you because there is no way I can do what you do.
You
I'm just
see,
not interested.
I'm going to clear the air on one thing. I've had a lot of people come to say, "How do you remember these lines? How do you like watch it once? Are you like Rain Man and you just know these?"
I know
No,
that you're not.
no. You know I'm not. You know I'm not. And anyone who might think I am not. Um, because I liked it so
Mhm.
much and I watched it so much and I would learn the lines as being someone who enjoyed acting.
Yeah,
Um, I,
they're
I
just
I just gravitated towards memorizing these things, and it was became easier for me. Like I said, I'm not doing everything absolutely verbatim, but I know I'm pretty close. So I'm
but
clearing the air there.
yeah,
I'm not
I
some Superman.
so I do think where I was going with that is that he was very aware of what was to
What
come, the
was probably to
sentencing,
come? Yes.
and that's a frightening.
I was only at the last minute because of the king's conscience that
That
St.
he was
Thomas ended
beheaded.
up being merely beheaded,
Yep.
not drawn and quartered. Drawn and quartered was a horrible,
Yeah,
horrible death.
yeah, yeah.
Um, you don't want me to, you look like you didn't
No.
really want me to know, you don't want to explain it. Well, look it up. It's
Yeah,
you
there's
won't
plenty
like
of
it. You won't like it. But anyway, you come to trial and it opens, I mean, it opens up, really with St. Thomas alone in a room before walking into the court,
Just
praying to
praying.
the
I
Blessed
love that.
Virgin Mary
Yep, I
to
love that.
watch over his wife and his daughter and give him strength, I'm sure. And as he enters the court, completely packed, and the charge is said. It's like he said, "Well, why have been called here again?" So to answer the charge of high treason, Sir Thomas. And as Cromwell reminds him, it says, and for which the punishment is not imprisonment, but death. Comes for us all, my lords. Yes, even for kings he comes. The death of kings is not in question, nor is mine, I'm trust, until I'm proven guilty. Then Norfolk comes in. Your life lies in your own hands, Sir Thomas. Thomas, as it always has. Is that so, my lord? Then I'll keep a good grip on it. So in this, Cromwell is stating the case that Thomas's silence actually betokens his actual opinion, because it speaks clearly. Basically what Cromwell was saying, that if he was a true son of England, if he was for the king, why doesn't he just come out and say it? Obviously, his silence, he's against it. And Thomas argues with, like I said before, no, he says, not so, not so, my master secretary. For the axiom of the law is qui tansit consentire, by silence gives consent. So you have to construe that I consent to it, not that I deny. Is that what you construe from it? Is that what you wish the world would construe from it? He says, the world must construe according to its wits, and this courtroom must construe according to the law. Now, in this, again, Thomas More knows is like they don't have a case against me. But then they bring in Richard Rich. And it's the one time you actually see Thomas just surprised. Wait, what's going on here?
Yeah, which
And,
I think they casted him pretty well. The man who played him definitely looked like a sniveling rat. So
John Hurt, is one of the best character actors of all
yeah,
time. I mean,
character actors are super important. I
oh,
mean, they make
he's
everything. Yeah,
John Hurt is great. I liked pretty much everything I've seen him in. I've enjoyed,
I
whether,
don't know
well,
what.
not I Claudius. I didn't like what I saw of I Claudius, but um Elephant Man. He was great in Elephant Man. He was great in Jim Henson's Storyteller. He was just so
Oh.
much fun. I liked him a lot. Um, but this was a young John Hurt. I mean, he was only probably like 20 years old when he did this. So, if not younger. But
Mhm.
anyway, uh well, the whole point here goes is this, he goes up to the I guess the bench, and puts his hand before the book and said, "Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?" No, it's like, no, he puts his hand on the book. I'm sorry. He says, "I, Richard Rich, solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth." And then the man there says, "So help me God, sir. So help me God."
Yeah, he
So then
hesitated.
Cromwell starts
Mhm.
questioning. He says, "All right, Richard, is it on May the 5th, I can't forget what it was, you went to the tower." Says, "Yes." "And why did you go there?" "I was sent to remove the prisoner's books." "And did you talk with the prisoner?" "Yes." "And what did you talk about?" I said, "By act of parliament, the king is made supreme of the church in England. Why will you, Sir Thomas, not accept him?" And being more a question, he's like, and Thomas said, that if by act of, if it was an act of parliament, say that, no, Richard said, and I said, says, what if there was an act of parliament that declared that I, Richard Rich, should be declared king? Would you, Sir Thomas, then take me for king? Well, that I would, he said, for then you would be king. Then he said, I'll offer you a higher case. What if by act of parliament to say that God should not be God? At this point, Thomas comes in and says, well, that is true. And then you said, and then he is shut up. He says, silence. And you could see that he's figuring out, oh, they're all in on this.
Mhm.
They're all in on this. Silence. Let the witness continue. And then I said, I'll offer you a middle case. By act of Parliament, the king is to be made supreme head of the church in England. Why will you, Sir Thomas, not accept him? And he said, Parliament had not the power to do it. Repeat the prisoner's exact words. That Parliament had not the competence. Words to that effect. Then Cromwell comes in, so he denied the title. He did. And you just see this Thomas, and this is like fantastic acting, just going down on his, just shaking his head, and says, Richard, I am more sorry for your perjury than my peril. Oh, you deny this, Sir Thomas? Yes. My lords, if I was a man not willing to take an oath, I will not be here. So I will now take an oath. If anything Master Rich here said is true, I pray I should never see God in the face, which I wouldn't say for anything else on heaven and earth. That is not evidence, but is it probable? Is it probable that after so long a silence I would choose to open my mind to such a man as that? And asking Rich if he would want to change his testimony, he said no. So do you want to question him, Sir Thomas? And he's like, for what purpose? I'm a dead man. You have your will of me. So he's really holding on to what he said to Margaret before, is that, as far as I am able to, I'm going to exhaust everything that I can, but my wit, my reason, the law, to get out of this. But if I can't, then I will know this is God's will, that I am meant to shed my blood. I am meant to die. He didn't want to presume himself that he was so strong and so courageous. I mean, even as he explained to his daughter when she was like, well, how won't you just take the oath, but in your mind think otherwise? And he says, Margaret, when a man takes an oath, he holds his own self in his hands like it were water. And if he were to open up those hands just a little bit, he would lose himself. He would never hope to find himself again. So he knew what it meant when you take an oath. It's not just words you say. Now, going back now to this court scene, and one of the most interesting lines comes there as Richard is free to go, and Thomas comes. Actually, I do have one question for the witness. That is a chain of office you're wearing. May I see it? Richard comes to him, and he says, what's this? The Red Dragon. What is this? Then Cromwell tells him, well, Sir Richard has been made Attorney General for Wales. Thomas shakes his head, says Richard, it profits a man nothing, even if he were to gain the whole world. But for Wales. I want to comment on that because it reminds us what our Lord said, that if we lose our soul, if we have the whole world, it means nothing. The world is made to advance the greater honor and glory of God, not to combat with it. Our soul is what's so important. Thomas More knew that. He gave up everything for the sake of his own soul and soul of his family, the soul of his country. He was willing to do that. He was willing to die.
Who knows what really would have happened if someone like St. Thomas, who was admired really for his virtue, it really was. Yes, he was a great lawyer, excellent judge, but he was those things because of his loyalty to God, his virtue. And if he would have just gone the easier path, that way, he wouldn't live in poverty and all these things. Well, if you think things are terrible now, I just I shudder to think what could have happened.
Well, you get into the mind of Thomas More. Like when he was Lord Chancellor, there was an instance where he attended Mass. He attended Mass daily. He often, most of the time, attended Vespers. And there was one time he was at Mass, and some political officials came in. And this is not from the movie. This is an event in his life. And they came in, and they were summoning him. The king wants to see you. And Thomas ignored them. And as time went on, they kept bugging him. Says, Sir Thomas, Lord Chancellor, the king requests you. And he was ignoring. He says, and they said, are you going to ignore the summons of your king? And Sir Thomas said something to the effect of, I said, surely our Lord King would not be upset that I'm giving homage to his king.
Yeah.
that I am taking the time to owe to his king what is expected of me, and attending the holy sacrifice of the mass being the central uh focal point of all worship,
Mhm.
true worship. St. Thomas understood that. Now going back to the scene in the film, this the final scene. Um,
Yeah, we're getting there, folks. I
One way we're
promise.
getting there. When it's announced, I didn't even touch even close to everything I could have done.
I know.
But if I did, I basically just say we should just watch the movie then. But he asks, he's like, so the court then asks, is it done? He says, Cromwell says, Lords, I'm done. And then the one presiding, the Lord presiding says, all right, now the jury will have to take time and examine the evidence and consider the evidence. And Cromwell goes, well, considering the evidence, there should be no reason for them to retire. It should not be necessary. Is it necessary? Of course, you can see that these men are just kind of like, well, okay. I mean, I guess we're not actually going to discuss this and come to a decision. All right. So they all just kind of looked at each other, and then the spokesperson for that goes up and says, "So what is your verdict? Guilty, my lord." So they start announcing sentence. Now, actually, I got to note this because this is very important. That Thomas Bolt didn't just make all this up. I'm sure there were some alterations, but this is actually from the documents of that trial. Things that St. Thomas said and things that came up. I mean, there were a little few differences because it 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 wasn't just Richard Rich who was at the tower. There were two other men, and that's actually referenced in the stage version, but you take certain things out to move the story along, and of course, that's why you take liberties. But these men were conveniently unavailable. One was actually in another country. They made sure that credible witnesses could not go against what they were trying to put
Mhm,
forth. Their perjury, basically.
mhm.
So uh, Thomas More, and it says, well, no, he says, well, Thomas More, you've been charged of high treason and the sentencing of the court. And Thomas interrupts. He says, my lords, on that law, the manner was before pronouncing sentence is they asked the prisoner if he had anything he wished to say. Do you have anything you wish to say? Yes. And this is the point where Thomas More just is like, all right, I'm not getting out of this. I tried everything that I could, but now, all right, you want to know? I'll tell you. It says,
Yep.
seeing as the court seems fit to condemn me, and God knoweth how, I shall discharge my mind concerning the indictment in the king's title. The indictment is enacted by an act of parliament which is repugnant to the laws of God and his holy church, the supreme government of which no temple person can take upon it. And I don't know it well enough. I really don't know it well enough to be able to do the whole thing. I'm just gonna mumble through a lot of it, but it's so good. Maybe a few years ago I could have done it, but until I had to fill my head with more important knowledge. But there's a point where he makes it very clear that that says this. He says, and no simple person should take upon it, as this was promised to Saint Peter and the bishops of Rome while Christ lived and was personally present here on earth. And also the immunity of the church is promised and guaranteed both in Magna Carta and the king's very own coronation oath. Cromwell goes, now we finally truly see you are malicious. Not so. I'm the king's true subject. I pray for him and all the realm. I wish none harm. I speak none harm. I think none harm. If this not be enough to keep a man alive, then I no Does this not be enough to keep a man alive? Then I long not to live. Nevertheless, it wasn't for the supremacy that you sought my blood, because I would not bend to the marriage. So then he's given his sentence. And the final scene of the film is him at the gallows. And the depiction in the movie was, no, I'm commanded by the king to be brief, and brief I shall be. No, being the king's subject, brief I will be. I am the king's good servant, but God's first. And as he turns, and you have the executioner, kneels before him and says, "And I forgive you quite readily." Says, "Do not be ashamed of your office. You said to me to God." Cranmer goes, "Are you sure of that, Sir Thomas? He will not refuse one so blithe to go to him." Blithe, willing to go to him. And actually, it was recorded that uh, when he was being his actual execution, and this is in the stage play, that Cranmer was coming to, I don't know, maybe absolve his sin. It was kind of happened at times. And he said, "Stay away from me, Archbishop, stay away from me." And he was so weakened. Thomas More was so weakened at this point with his imprisonment and all the stress he went through. He goes to the soldiers who were there at his execution. He's like, he says, "Gentlemen, I will need your says I may need your help to get up to the scaffolding, but I I should be able to get down all right by myself." So a little bit of say Thomas More had a wicked sense of humor, and he was known for his sense of humor. Not really shown as much in the movie because it was such a serious matter. But anyway, um, again, like I said, I could have gone so much more into
Mhm.
scenes for this movie. It's such a well done. It won Best Picture. Thomas More, oh, Paul Scofield won Best Actor. It was really powerful and moving. And what I like about it, it does show what a man is willing to give up for the love of God. A
Mhm.
man who had and interesting enough, Robert Bolt, the one who wrote the stage play and wrote the screenplay for the movie, he was not a Catholic. He's a Protestant, but he found Thomas More's um, story so compelling. This is Lord Chancellor. He is second only to the king. He gave it all up. He gave it all up. And as there's a scene where he's talking to Norfolk, and you trade all of that for a belief. Thomas More says, "No, not alone because I believe it, but that I believe it." It's not just that he believes it, but that it is the truth. It's one of those films where we can really find God of inspiration in and in the life of the saint. And I hope it encourages actually reading of the saint. While he was in Thomas More was in the Tower of London, he actually wrote a book called A Dialogue of Comfort Against Tribulation.
Yes. We
Which,
actually covered that book, oh gosh, it'd be like 8, 9 years ago in the early stages of Monday Night Religion class. So
and it's an excellent book to the parts that I've read. I can't say I've read the whole thing, but it's an
I can't
excellent
say I
book.
completely remember. I had to.
But it shows a man who really understood what it means uh, to give all for God. To say with Christ um, in the Garden of Gethsemane, let this cup pass away from me. And that's what Thomas More was saying. Let this cup pass from me. But if it cannot pass unless I drink it, thy will be done. Um, yeah, I really like this movie. I really should watch it
Are
again.
you
I
sure
kind of,
it's not your favorite?
well, it might be. It's really hard. I think I could say it's my favorite. I mean, I've seen some really good ones.
We're talking religious movies.
Religious. Oh, well,
Yeah,
religious movies, of course.
yeah,
I have my favorite secular movie, but it doesn't fit here.
no,
But
no.
there's been other really good ones that we probably will go over eventually down the line.
Eventually. Mhm.
But that's really all I have to say on it. Anything you
Yeah.
want to say, sister, on it?
I don't think so, just in the sense that, this is running kind of long. But
This
you
well,
could
this
adjust the speed on the episode. I come to realize that not every episode is going to get listened by everybody that comes to our
whoa.
podcast, because there's a you're seeing the time now, aren't you? Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
but there's a few podcasts I follow, but I don't listen to every episode that they produce.
no, that's
I
true.
look at the topic. I was like, oh, I'm not really interested in that right now. Maybe I'll go back
Well,
eventually.
I hope that yeah, that some can get, interested, into it and be inspired to say, "Well, let me look at this
Right.
film, read the life of St. Thomas."
What does help is that with the platforms we have, it helps you keep track of where you
Mhm.
are. So that
Yes.
does help. I mean, I do realize that we never did. You were going to read from the Poverello's Roundtable. I guess I'm just going to have to put that in the serif
Yeah,
soon.
we never got
So
to that, did we?
no,
We never got to
um,
that. Well,
no,
what
but
do well,
there's some really good
that
books.
was like 2 hours ago. I don't even remember.
Not quite 2 hours, but it's getting there. Um, just that there is a book, a children's book. It was part
Mhm.
of the Vision Publishing about St. Thomas More. That is a great
Okay.
story. I really
Really?
liked it. Oh,
Okay.
easy read. If you don't have a copy in Wisconsin, Father, we have several copies here that I could send one.
Alright.
Because I really like that series. I know they're not always so easy to come by, but that was
Mhm.
a really good story. I should actually read that again. I kind of miss that kind of reading. I really haven't picked up one of the Saints books in a long time just because
Mhm.
of other obligations. Not that I'm not doing any spiritual reading, but
No, but
um, that's more of like the lighter reading where you could take a
mhm.
lot from it, but it's
Well, it's not the same as the spiritual reading like you do for meditation, but it can
right.
be used for meditation at times.
Absolutely,
Depends
absolutely.
whatever inspires you in your love of God.
Maybe I'll
Uh,
pick one of those for Lent. Um, but I got other books I'm going to read for Lent, so it's kind of and it's coming up so fast, and I feel like it's going to be over.
yeah, Lent yeah, it's coming pretty quick.
Mhm.
So,
Anyway,
lot
yep,
happening, sister.
a lot
So,
happening.
I guess I'll just say I hope, people enjoy, this little bit of the commentary, a little bit of
Yes.
church history.
And I'd say if you've seen it
Um,
or you do see it, let us know.
Yeah,
Comment,
what do you
send us an
think what do you think of
email.
the film? What do
Yep.
you think of, Thomas More um, what virtues really stand out to you, about
Yep.
him? And, we'd be very interested, to see, and I guess, well, with that, sister, we'll just say, goodbye, God bless, and Deo gracias.
San Diego, gracias.